welcome to the Melodic Morning Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Fellows, and this is your co-host,
Reece Dennis. Hello.
Hello. Today we're interviewing Chris Aldridge about his work as a session musician, saxophonist. So hello, Chris. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you.
Aye, good. So start us off then. When did you start playing saxophone?
I started playing sax when I was 11. I've got a bit of a history of music in my family. My uncle was a singer in a band called Penny Black that won Opportunity Knocks in the 70s. And my cousin Nigel was the original drummer with the Charlatans.
Right.
So it kind of traces back through. My nan was a drummer, and my granddad was an accordionist. And as we trace the family tree back, this only came to like a few months ago, that I think it's my great uncle was a famous opera singer, and he toured with Houdini. He was best friends with Houdini. He toured the world with Houdini.
Jeez.
And I know I can't show the picture because it's a podcast, but we share similar cheekbone structure.
Oh, right.
So, you know. But yeah, I started playing when I was 11, so I was surrounded by music. My dad's an artist, my uncle's an artist as well, so I'd always go to gigs, etc., that my uncle was doing. I was influenced by lots of different things at the time. I mean, probably my uncle being one, you know, my dad as well, because my dad played a little bit of piano and drums and guitar. But my biggest influence was, this sounds really odd, but it was an advert. It was an advert for a track called Only You, and it was played by the saxophone. And I loved the piece of music, and I loved the song. And at the time, there were lots of things on BBC Arts talking about people like Charlie Parker and John Coltrane, but I didn't really know who they were. But I remember seeing a documentary on Charlie Parker and thinking, wow, that's amazing. So I started when I was 11. I saved up for my first saxophone by doing calligraphy for people's weddings. And I had a saxophone jar that I put all of my money in from my calligraphy earnings. And then I bought my first saxophone from a band called King Pleasure and the Biscuit Boys, who's a local band. And Mark, who's King Pleasure, he used to work with my mum and my dad. He's an artist as well. And I went to buy my first saxophone from their house. And I used to go and see that band as well, and they were kind of influential. They did all the kind of 70s jump and jive thing. There was 3 saxophones in there, so I was in my elements. And then to buy a saxophone from the band, it was like, wow. And then kind of 10 years later, I ended up playing with that band, which was really kind of cool. So, so Charlie Parker, he's my kind of first like major influence. John Coltrane, Bob Brecker, Stevie Wonder, Frank Zappa, obviously Prince. You know, lots of different people, really. Pat Metheny, inspired by art as well as music as well. So I love Dali and love the pre-Raphaelites. But yes, those are my direct influences on saxophone.
Right. And you talk about having all these influences at like such a young age. Was at the age of the time, was that when you was like, right, I want to have a career in this, or was it just more of like a hobby at the time, or like something the family did together? The family did now and again, you know.
Well, the family didn't really. It was an odd one because even though there was music in my family, we never played together.
Ah, right.
So in my house, like with myself, my sister, and my mum and dad, there was only really me who played, who had access to instruments. I had a couple of harmonicas when I was about 9, but I didn't really play with my uncle or my cousin because they were off doing their thing. And like my nan and my granddad weren't with us, unfortunately they died when I was pretty young, so it was a fairly solitary experience at first, but my dad did start playing keyboards with me on some gigs. So
right. But is that when did it start becoming more, not earning money from this, but you thought, right, I can take this further out into the world instead of just practicing and playing about?
Well, I was a little obsessive as a child in terms of music, so once I'd kind of earned my money over a 12-month period to get my saxophone. So then, of course, when I got it, I wouldn't put it down. My first, before I had lessons, I started playing saxophone incorrectly. So I had both hands at the top, and I developed my own pieces of music. which were, looking back, weren't particularly brilliant. But I started having sax lessons, and within 6 months, I would say, I thought, do you know what? I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I went to my dad's place of work. He was a lithographic artist at the time, and I thought that's what I wanted to be into. I was quite into art as well. And I went there for a day, and I said I'd never ever step foot in that environment ever again. And then going and seeing gigs and realise, meeting guys from King Pleasure, and then the Red Lemons were around at the time as well, so I saw them, and I ended up playing with them when I was 16. So I realised from a very early age that's what I wanted to do. I started writing music when I was about 12, but because of the kind of practice routine, I'd get in from school and I'd practice like for 3 hours. I'd try to shoehorn saxophone into every lesson at school, including geography, which was a weird one. So my geography teacher was dead cool, and he was like, well, you can like write a piece of music about, stuff. It's like wicked. I'll do that, And he's a jazz fan as well. So I realised from a very early age that's what I wanted to do, because I was so into Charlie Parker. I remember going to see my saxophone teacher and saying that I wanted to play. I bought a Charlie Parker book, and he said that I wouldn't be able to play it. So I thought, right, next week I'm going to play that to you,
prove you wrong.
Absolutely. So I started doing gigs then, and thinking about earning money from it. When I was 12, I started playing Charlie Parker transcriptions with a Dr. Rhythm drum machine. That was my gig.
Oh, right.
And then my mate, who was interested in music but wasn't really a musician, we decided to have a band together, and my dad kind of taught him a couple of beats on drums, so we did gigs like that. From then I joined the West Midlands Police Big Band when I was 12. And by 13 I was playing lead alto and being the MD of the band, which was quite cool because there was like loads of 60-year-old guys and like this little kid at the front with a tuxedo on, like waving his arms around, appearing to know what he's doing but not really know what he's doing. So from a very early age, I started earning money from it from 13 really.
Nice, yeah. So the next sort of question we've got for you is sort of how do you sort of keep motivated with your work? I know that's probably it's sometimes a difficult sort of question, but so anything that sort of frustrates you with your practice or with your playing, anything that sort of motivated you to sort of keep going, it's just sort of
yeah, that's cool. I won't say money because that comes and goes, but I did realise from an early age that that whatever you do you should be paid for to some extent. I mean, my first gig was when I was 11, and I got paid with sweets, which was pretty cool at the time, So I thought, yeah, this is all right, So keeping motivated is quite an odd one, really, because being self-employed and essentially being, I work in various different bands, and I'm kind of part of some bands. It's quite difficult because you have to keep self-motivation. It's almost you have to keep yourself organised. Although I'm sure my family would disagree with that when they see when I get in and there's stuff everywhere. After keeping motivated in terms of practice, is that the kind of line that you're thinking of, or just generally? Yeah,
well, both. Yeah, it's sort of keeping motivated within sort of practicing things that you obviously in the past might have found difficult or now find difficult to practice things, and motivated just to sort of keep your work ethic up for gigs and things like that.
Got you. I mean, there's the influences are a direct link with that. I mean, there's one of the guys who's a major influence is Roland Kirk, who was blind from birth, but then he was playing 2 saxophones at the same time, then eventually 3 saxophones at the same time, lots of use of one of his arms, and was still playing 2 saxophones at the same time. So to go against everything, that I think that's a pretty amazing thing to do.
Of course.
In terms of motivation, I've always composed my own music, and I've always been into that as much as I have done my playing as well. Obviously, the music industry, it's an absolutely amazing place to be, but it's also extremely frustrating, and it's difficult at times. So keeping my diary organised, that's pretty sometimes that has challenges, or trying to be in sometimes 3 places at the same time, particularly if it's in, if it's out of the country as well, and you're doing other things at the same time. That's hard. And of course, I've got 2 kids as well, who are both musos. But in terms of motivation, it's kind of difficult, really. It's having more of a headset and more of a mental approach to it, more than the physicalities. In terms of, I've not always got time to practice, but I am playing a lot. So I try to put things that I'm trying to practice into gigs. In terms of finding things difficult, elements that do frustrate me, it's finding other people like James Carter or Donny McCaslin over discovered recently, and just hearing them and being influenced by them, but also thinking, oh my life, how do they do that? And, how much practice have I got to put in to sound like that? But then the other part of me thinks, well, as musicians, we all have our own voice.
Of course, yeah.
I know people like kind of practice to be like Mike Brecker, or to be like Vinnie Colaiuta, or to be like Jack Apostolos or whatever, but they already exist. So I prefer to work on myself and be directly influenced by these other people and make my own sound from that. As far as things that frustrate me, where do I start? Practicing pieces of music. Sometimes when I've got a recording session and I think, do you know what, I'm going to be out of here in an hour, and then 4 hours later they're saying, no, we just need that note slightly back, or that can be frustrating, but also take it as a learning experience, because I think that we're all students of music. I don't think there's ever any end to it. I don't think anybody ever goes, do you know what, I'm at the pinnacle of my career, because it doesn't exist. The pinnacle of your career is your last kind of gig before you pop your clogs, I suppose, really. So I have that viewpoint that I'm always learning, I'm always trying to improve. So I tend to practice things that, in terms of saxophone, things like quarter tones and altissimos and harmonics, which they can become frustrating a little bit, because you think, well, I've just spent an hour trying to sound like a farm animal, but I know that can be used in my technique in some way, but only in a little bit. There's certain things that you practice on saxophone that sound horrendous, but when you put them into context in your playing, it kind of comes through. Well, in terms of working with other people, I know Paul mentioned earlier about my work with Surinder Sandhu, which was an Indo jazz fusion project that I worked with about 15 years ago. Frustrating parts of that, again, it's a learning experience, because discovering how Indian classical music and crossover music works, that was great. In terms of the rhythmic elements, where you've got things that are in 11/8, I mean, first off, that's really hard. Yeah.
just
and then altering the melody, and then having Indian percussionists who are phenomenal musicians, then like kind of joking about, let's move the one around, and they're like kind of laughing and going, oh, this is really funny, we moved the one around, and I'm going, oh, somebody just like directly shout one. So kind of being frustrated by my lack of understanding of that, in terms of some of the gigs that we did, is feeling like I'd lost control, and then trying to regain myself back into the picture, while not kind of feeling like I'd embarrassed myself. So almost masking that, but then ultimately knowing that I'd kind of fudge my way through, and being a bit disappointed with myself with that. So that kind of motivates me, and then I'd work on, elements of that. The bassoon, that frustrates me.
Just as a whole,
just a little bit, yeah. Mainly because I know I've spoken about this before in taking things on. That I play all different kinds of woodwind. I play some Indian woodwind. I play some African woodwind as well. I play all the saxophone family, clarinets, flutes, piccolo, etc., wind synth, blah blah blah, as well as other things. But then going to a session and only having a bassoon for a week, and taking my abracadabra book with me, and then realising that everybody's dying on the floor of laughter because it just sounds horrendous. That's frustrating. So I'm scarred by the bassoon.
Okay, well, Luckily, we have a bassoon with us now.
Brilliant.
So, like,
Bring it on.
No, that's cool. So, yeah. One of the things I'm curious about is, like, what do you find rewarding about being a session player? Is it the gigs themselves, or is it more the people you're playing with? Because sometimes you can be asked to, like, dep a gig and just be with people you've never played before in your life, but then, you know, it can either turn out really great and you just sort of, like, gel well with these players, you know. Sometimes it can go the other way and, you know, you just sort of improvising over a few chords, you know. Like, but... What are some of the rewarding aspects of a session musician?
I think, how you just said, it's a people-based industry, and when you meet new people, it's always good for contacts both ways. Do you know what I mean?
Networking and all that.
Absolutely. So from a kind of financial standpoint and keeping it, you know, I think there's different heads that you have to maintain. You have to maintain a business head, because otherwise you don't pay the mortgage and eat and all the rest of it. But you also have to maintain a creative head as well, and that kind of personal element as well, because it's a people-based industry. You kind of, you know, I think the most important thing is to always treat people as you want to be treated yourself.
Exactly.
You know, and be nice. And one of the most rewarding things is meeting new people, and when you get on well socially as well, and then when you end up playing together, there's this unwritten kind of form of communication, and you kind of get to know people by playing with them, and kind of it's weird because I mean I've always considered music's the only international language, and then playing with different people who you've never met, and then kind of feeling something from them and bouncing off each other in that way, I think that's a really magical thing. So I'd say that money comes and goes. The most rewarding thing is meeting people and then learning something different about yourself. You know, working with other musicians, and then like the surrender thing, people kind of almost pushing you in a way, in a very nice way, out of your comfort zone and discovering new things about yourself, or being kind of really autonomous in terms of improvisation approach. That's very good too, and you're working from different people in that respect. So yeah, it's the people which are the rewards really in those experiences that you take with you. You harness them in your creativity, and you might take money from it as well, but there might be other things that you take from other people and kind of go, actually, I could use what they're doing, and you start working with them, and they want to work with you, and then you end up going a different avenue, and it's all good.
Okay. This is sort of a recurring sort of question we have. It's sort of, if you could give yourself sort of one piece of advice sort of at the start of your career, what would that be? I know that's a bit of another strange question, but
it's I would say just listen to yourself. Don't, as much as it's a people-based industry, other people can guide you in the wrong way, or there's certain things that I perhaps should have done when I was younger that I didn't do because I thought it was the right thing to do for others. I know that sounds a bit kind of cryptic, but for example, I did. I used to work with a band called Bizarre Inc. and a band called Mother, and we had the theme tune for the clothes show, and they were quite a big deal. Bizarre Inc. were at the time, they were around with 808 States and Andrew Brown, and they were quite big on the dance scene. And I had the opportunity to tour with a band called The Orbital, who again were quite big at the time, and it was like a huge European tour. But because I'd had some functions in my diary, and they were the first thing in, I honoured those functions rather than going on the tour. And because I'd listened to other people, whereas if I'd have gone onto the tour, other things may have happened. And I had an album deal when I was 19. If I'd have not listened to some people at the time, and been a bit more kind of bloody minded with my approach, and perhaps a bit more assertive on what I wanted, my career may have taken a slightly different path. But I mean, I'm happy with the career that I've had, you know what I mean, and still having, hopefully, you know. So I am happy with that. It's just perhaps don't always take everything that people say to be the truth, or to be, to be an actual advice. Treat it all with a pinch of salt.
No, that's good advice. Just being honest with yourself and what you want to guess, like from being a musician.
Yeah.
Really, yeah.
Well, I think that stems into my own creativity as well, because I try to, my kind of work ethic, and now this goes back to the question previously, but my work ethic is to be as autonomous as possible and as honest as possible. So when I'm performing, to be honest with my creativity and honest with my emotional output through my music, and to not necessarily repeat myself. I know we all have ruts that we can kind of play in, you know, and if something comes up and it's a piece of music we've played a million times, there's certain things that we can call on and go, we know that sounds good, but that doesn't develop, it doesn't develop you as a musician. So I always try to do different solos, you know, always think about if I'm playing in a horn section to be really on it with articulation, etc. But more times of improvisation, always do something different that I've done before.
Right, yeah, really, really good answer. Thank you, Chris, for coming on the podcast.
No problem.
Where can we find your work, or do you have any upcoming projects?
Sorry.
Oh, so no. I was going to say we should be on the lookout for. Like,
there's a few kind of upcoming projects. I've recently got my studio back up and running. So at the moment I've got 4 different projects on the go.
Right.
So they're all the stuff that's been recorded and edited, etc. So I mean my website's bbplanet.com, which is BEEBE planet.com. So there's various bits on there. There's stuff on iTunes and also on YouTube. I work with a band called Climax Blues Band, who released an album at the beginning of the year, so we're promoting that at the moment. So that's going pretty well over here and over in Europe. Various bits and bobs, really. Just trying to, trying to expand the amount of hours in a day and the amount of days in a week to fit everything in.
Right. Well, yeah. Thanks again for coming on the podcast.
No problem.
Podcast, Chris.
Thank you.
We'll edit that in. It's fine.
Boom.
Yeah. So thank you for listening to the Melodic Mornings Podcast. I've been your host, Rhys Ennis.
And I've been your host, Matt Fellows.
And have a melodic morning.